What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. Came up with a cheesy but effective title for now. Great Scott, it's your true crime Phil. That is what I went with on the thumbnail. Great Scott, it's your true crime Phil. A show so good it happens every Friday, right around now. Of course, you guys know the man in the Hawaiian shirt, America's most respected detective, Phil Waters. Spent 23 years working as a homicide detective in the Houston PD, investigating more than 400 homicide cases. He's also a Marine and the owner of KINDRED Spirits Investigations, and starred in the show The Interrogator. The man in the non-Hawaiian shirt, Agent Scott Duffey, is director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. He's got a sharp haircut. Scott is a retired FBI agent out of Wilmington, Delaware, working crime matters, including gangs, bank robberies, and even fugitive task force cases. He also served 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. They obviously both have unique backgrounds. What is going on? Astra, I believe it is, from the UK, and Brent Miller. Pray for East Palestine. Love the show. What's going on there is crazy with the railroad derailment, the train derailment, spilling chemicals into the air. So listen, obviously, the talk of the world right now in true crime is the Alex Murdaugh trial. I was going to start with Brian Koberger, but I think we'll start with Alex Murdaugh and get these guys' take about how that case is going, and specifically the fact that Alex Murdaugh is on the stand as we speak. So the real devotees of that trial are probably watching that instead of us, but they will catch it on the rebound. Christina says hello from Rotterdam, Netherlands. I love it. Followed by Shady. Hello from Scotland. And look at this. Patricia Burns. Hiya from Liverpool, UK. We've got the whole world checking in here, including Allie Snow, who says, hey, hey, hey. So, Phil, I reached out to you and I said, hey, are you watching this Murdaugh trial? And you responded by saying it is riveting. How come? Why do you think it is so riveting?
Well, I think the background on the thing is, I've said it before, but it is something you can't script. This is already I know all the true crime shows are lining up. They can't wait to do their version of this particular case once this trial is concluded. And there's already been a couple of depictions, I think, on maybe Netflix and some other places, some streaming stuff. So it's just a very interesting case for me from a perspective of a homicide detective. And it's got so many moving parts, and that is all starting to come out now in the trial, where we are starting to see, I think it's the last number I saw, I think was over 500 pieces of evidence, 59 some odd witnesses for the prosecution, and now we're into the defense. So I would have to say that I have said before that I thought the prosecution was doing a good job in terms of all the affirmative links, plugging them in. And I know that some of the attorneys, some of the former prosecutors and defense attorneys have said that they're doing a horrible job and that kind of thing. So a difference of opinion there. But I would say that where I have seen, where I think, excuse me, are some little problems, are the prosecutor, by the name is Waters. His last name is Waters.
No relation.
Oh, well, I'm sure somewhere in the DNA, somewhere way back there. But he got off of the murder part and got really into this proving a motive thing. Motive's not required to be proved. Of course, that's what everybody wants to know. And I'm not so sure that he didn't get off into the weeds about that. He did it at the end of the prosecution's case, that may have caused some confusion or the distraction. There are times when you can provide the jury way too much information. So I don't know if that was I understood what he was trying to accomplish, but I'm not so sure he got there. And I think it may serve as some confusion. And then when we get into what's happened here in the last couple of days, which I have watched all of in fact, I turned it off to get on here, but I've been watching Murdaugh's testimony for the last day and a half so far. And I'll let
yeah. And Phil, I want to get,
we can talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, it's an interesting case.
Phil is, as is Scott, I mean, they are expert human observers. So I want to come back to both Phil and Scott after we kind of lay the groundwork to just get their take on visually what they are witnessing, the way he's maneuvering around the stand, and the way he's handling questions just from a human behavioral standpoint. But Astra here writes, he is, and I'm going to try to get to as many comments today as possible. And Phil has somewhere to be, so might not be as long as usual, but we will crack through this and maybe even get to some of the evildoer, as Phil refers to him, out in Idaho, if we have time. But Astra writes, he is guilty of sin, digging a bigger hole for himself on the stand. Don't think the prosecution have proved beyond a reasonable doubt yet. So kind of both sides of the coin there. To Patricia Burns, Alec cannot keep his lies straight. He's a disgrace to his profession. Straight over to Allie Snow, guilty. He can't remember anything but exculpatory testimony. Onto Suzu here. No moral Murdaugh. And then probably the best question so far, Brent Miller, what is Scott's go-to drink during the show? Probably water is my guess, because coffee. Look at that, Dunkin' Donuts coffee. So I was looking through the Twitter sphere and other areas, and just to get reaction. But this is something that Creighton Waters said to Alex Murdaugh today when he was on the stand, which he is still currently on. Creighton Waters, the prosecutor, says to Alex Murdaugh, you were very cooperative, except for maybe the most important fact of all, that you were at the murder scene with the victims just minutes before they died, right? Murdaugh responds, I did not tell them I went to the kennel. So for those of you who are not overly familiar, this murder happened roughly around 8:50 p.m. in the evening on January 7th, 2021, 8:50 in the evening. And all along this entire time, Scott, Alex Murdaugh has said and claimed that he was never at the kennels, the dog kennels on his property where this murder occurred, until he had to take the stand yesterday. And when he gets on the witness stand, there's audio of him. So he basically is cornered and has to admit that he was finally at the scene of the crime just moments before it happens. How devastating is this to his case and the defense's case, just simply on a timeline basis?
So what are witnesses and anyone who's on a stand being measured against? Are they credible? Are they truthful? And if you tell a lie, you tell a lie. And he even said it on the stand. Once I started lying, I kept lying. And so it's so important to realize when a jury is looking at each and every piece of evidence being provided by, first and foremost, law enforcement, and then, of course, by expert witnesses, and then family and other witnesses and so forth. The jury is studying them, sometimes hearing listening to their words, but more importantly, studying their behavior. And Phil and I, and any law enforcement person out there that have interviewed thousands of people, we are looking at their body language. Are you nervous? Are you stressed out? What's going on? And trying to offer, to bring down the temperature in the room. But ultimately, if he didn't take the stand, that would have been left in the jurors' minds. He lied about being at the scene within minutes. And the last thing we heard is law enforcement presenting and other witnesses saying, yeah, that's Alex's voice. That's him. That's no doubt in our minds. And then if he didn't take the stand to say, well, I'm a liar. I'm a liar, but I'm not a murderer. That's true. There are two differences. But the key parts of him lying was placing himself at the scene or away from the scene. And it wasn't just a white lie. It wasn't just a lie like, sorry, I don't cheat on my wife. Sorry, I was this. Sorry, I'm not a thief or that. It was a lie that ultimately now puts him at the scene of the crime. That's a pivotal piece of evidence, I think.
And yeah, there's no evidence that anyone else was there. He never said that he heard dogs barking, never said he heard gunshots, because prior to this he wasn't there. Now that he's there, the fact that it was totally silent, dogs would have reacted to seeing strangers there. Family guns were used. A lot of things not adding up for him. But and again, this testimony is going on as we speak. People are I don't want to say upset, but they're frustrated with Creighton Waters, the prosecutor. They feel like he's not going after him quite as hard as he needs to be. But Ali Snow writes, and his mouth noise. He's doing this like clicking thing with his mouth constantly. He was crying quite a bit on the stand yesterday with, snot pouring from his nose, and it looked somewhat genuine. But, if I killed my wife and son, I have no doubt that he loved his wife and son. I think it could have been something in a moment of desperation. The great Phil Waters, to paraphrase him, has once said, or many times said, that anyone under a specific set of circumstances at a given time can basically snap. That's not how Phil says it, but something along those lines. And I'm going to get back to Phil in 1 second here. Ali Snow again, straight up lying about checking his wife and kids before calling 911. Thank you, Patricia. This is sweet. This is the best channel in the space with the very best guests. And then Phil, Net Detective writes, what is the one thing that makes you believe Murdaugh is guilty? And I don't know that you believe he's guilty, but if you do, what is the one thing, Phil?
Listening to his testimony yesterday, and as Scott has already alluded to, that the things that we look for is body language. We listen to what they're saying. We listen to how they're saying it. I think if I had one, there's many things obviously, but if I had one thing that I could pinpoint, was that in the middle of his getting on the stand is what he had to do. His defense attorney gets him on the stand. He chooses to get on the stand because he's trying to get in front of what the prosecution has already pointed out, is that he is a pathological liar. So he's already trying to get out in front of that by saying that I lied about everything, but not this. Well, I told many people in that room, you can tell me 99% of the truth and 1% of a lie, and that 1% turns that 100% into a lie. So he's trying to equivocate here and saying, I lied about all these things. I lied about all these, my drug use, the stealing from people, the lying to my law partner. But, and then you have to remember, and words are important. So then you have to remember what he said. I would never intentionally hurt my wife and son. But the word that he used was this, my spider sense went off the minute that phrase, I would never intentionally. So what he is doing is he is already trying to set up some mitigation and consideration about why it happened. Now, I think that the prosecution has gone after this theft and all of this stuff. I think it has more to do. So to answer that question, that one moment in that testimony, and by the way, the crying and all that was genuine. I mean, good grief, we had snot flowing.
Yeah. And Phil, I was going to ask you, have you had people who have become convicted murderers who have sobbed to you inside that interview room and the tears are genuine, but yet they've committed the crime?
I've had a couple that I think when they, and that's what that's a great question to ask, Joel, because what he's doing on that stand when all the snot starts to flow and these are real tears. This isn't a crocodile thing. He is feeling the entire weight and the anguish of what he did. And that's how it's coming out. Now, and he talks about hurting them. I don't think I've heard him use the term kill or murder in relation to what happened to his wife and his son. And the use of these supposed pet names, Mags and Paw Paw, I mean, come on. So it is interesting. He's a lawyer. He's apparently a very fine lawyer, very successful. And he is using all of those talents and all of those resources to try to present to this jury that he didn't do this thing. I think the problem that he has is that he's made some mistakes. And while he is doing that yesterday, I was noticing that a lot of tooth sucking and a lot of lip licking.
And what is
sucking down that?
What does tooth sucking and lip licking tell you? What does that tell you?
Oh, well, it's always a combination of the physical traits that the body, he cannot control these things. He cannot control these things. So the body is reacting to his offering deception. And it's not always one of these things. It's not one thing that it's a combination of these things. So when I'm watching him testify, and I thought he was going to suck the enamel right off those teeth. I mean, it was incredible. And then the licking of the lips, and he's bent over. He's almost in what we would call surrender. I mean, he's almost in surrender. And I think I've talked about that before.
Yeah. But these are all indicators of deception to you.
To me,
like if you were
and then there are a couple of times, and I need to go back and look and see when I.
But if you're interviewing him, let's say this crime happened in Houston, and you had him in your interview room, and he's doing all this lip sucking and tooth sucking and all this. Are you going out and telling your partner, this guy is being deceptive? This guy, I mean, are you guys talking about that to each other?
Well, it would depend.
Whoop. And there goes Phil. He'll be back on. I had a feeling that could happen. Perfect segue to you, Scott. I was going to ask you, so according to Alex Murdaugh, he was spending $50,000 a week on Oxy. Is that, I mean, that you're a guy that dealt with the drug, fighting the war on drugs. Let's put it that way. How much Oxy is $50,000 a week worth? I mean, that's not something a single person could engage in and survive, is it?
No, when I heard some of those numbers, I was amazed. Was he talking about personal consumption? Is he talking about, is he in the trade?
Yeah.
Is he actually losing, whatever it is? That's a whole lot of money. And so I'm retired 5 years now, but it hasn't changed much. And having dealt much in the drug world in Delaware, and $10, $5, $15, $20. Those are your typical amounts for whether it be a pill, whether it be for a bag of heroin. So I've talked to quite a bit of desperate addicted individuals having committed one crime or another as a result to fuel their addiction, and I've seen some amazing amounts of money spent. Never that I've never heard of that for personal consumption.
I mean,
In a
just to give people like a sense, like what would weekly, someone who's really, you know, hung up on oxy, addicted to it, what is a number that they would spend a week potentially? I mean,
you could satisfy that habit at a couple of $100. And of course the addiction grows, so you know you're you're looking for that fund source, and then typically resorting to breaking into cars, and then escalating the crime in order to maximize your dollar amount. But typically, you know, I would say one of the bigger ones of a bank robber, who was robbing banks to fund his heroin addiction, and he was probably spending. Ooh, and I thought the addiction was up there, probably in the realm of 2,500 a week, and then resort to another bank robbery as soon as so $2,500 a week spend, you know, and typically, you know, maybe anywhere from 13 to 20 bags a day. You know, you're.
but Scott, I mean, like when you're a heavy drug user, you start to do very desperate things as you're describing from this bank robber. Is it out of your realm of believability that between his drug addiction, spiraling out of control, as well as his whole financial world, that he may have had just basically, for lack of a better phrase, and I don't know if it's the right phrase, a psychotic break at that moment, and just, you know, lost his mind and shoots his wife and son? Is it out of the realm of believability for you that that could have happened?
I'm, I'm not. You're right. It's tough to coin a word. Psychotic break, probably not something. Absolutely something, somewhat of a um. Well, I was going to say not a well thought out act, right? If there's a break and then you do something, typically an enraged homicide or whatnot, you know, then you get into, you know, two different style weapons. That takes a lot of thought and planning, as opposed to you're just grabbing something that's close and then doing
Are you
something.
seeing drugs drive people to do irrational, crazy
Oh,
things?
absolutely, and especially in today's world. I mean, there was still somewhat of a sense of you know, the old saying honor among thieves, where there's still, you know, in the drug investigations of my day, it's straight up one drug, straight up another drug, and now so many drugs are laced with one thing or another, one chemical or another, has a lot of effects on the brain, especially for someone like him to admit that he has been decades addicted to heroin, oxy, whatever else he might be consuming. Absolutely, that's going to play into his thought process and his ability to reason, etc., and his ability to keep his temper down. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, having spoken to quite a few addicted individuals having committed one crime or another, I'm typically seeing them on the downside. And right during an interview, they'll be like, please, I can see the shaking. I can see the temper going up. I can see the desperation, where they said, hey, can we stop this interview? Can you let me take a hit of the heroin or the oxy that you just seized from my pockets?
Mm.
I'll confess to it. I'll do whatever. Just let me calm down a little bit,
Wow.
and then we can talk through this interview. So it's amazing what people of one addiction or another will do. But I totally agree with Phil in his assessment, with everything, especially as watching just the amount of saliva that he is reaching for, and that's ultimately what the body's doing. It wants that saliva, and because of whether it be deception, it's high stress, high tension that he is fighting, and everything is leaving his mouth. So therefore, he's guzzling bottles of water, and he's sucking every imaginable spit he can get, which really says a lot of this witness.
You will not get better saliva analysis on any other YouTube channel than this one. Meanwhile, our friend is back. He is always here. J. Thomas Reset, providing some statistical information for us here. The Law and Crime Survey, which I did see, 54,000 people voted in total. 66% of them saying guilty, 12% not guilty, 14% hung jury, 8% undecided. If this was in fact the jury, it looks like there would be a retrial at some point. And Phil, don't get too elated, because Jay also writes, I agree with Phil 100% on what you said earlier. I'll disagree on something later, probably. I love Astra here. She writes, same Phil, switch from watching the trial to watching this, much more thought-provoking. Over to Louise Henry. Good Lord, this guy is incredible, meaning Alex Murdaugh. He wants to be in control of every word on the stand. Unbelievable. I want to get into some more of the details, but one thing that came up in his cross yesterday, and this relates, so again, for those of you, most of you know this case inside out, but some are tuning in who are interested in Kohberger. So there was a boat accident. A young woman named Mallory Beach was killed. And after the accident, the Netflix doc right now, by the way, is amazing. You should check that out. I watched it. I binge watched it. But there's a point when Alex Murdaugh goes to visit Paw, as he is calling him now, whose real name is Paul. And he has got what appears to be a police badge in his wallet. I'm curious, Phil Waters, you worked hard. You became a Marine. You sweated. You probably spilled some blood. You became a law enforcement officer. Does it rub you the wrong way that a guy of privilege is walking in, flashing a badge that you had to earn?
Well, it's interesting, and it's not uncommon. He was a part-time contract solicitor. At some point, the sheriff that was his buddy and some other law enforcement official gave him a badge to carry. And they are officers of the court in Harris County, Texas, and in prosecutorial offices all across Texas. Those district attorneys can carry badges. And I have seen a couple that made a big deal out of carrying that badge. And I just think they were probably fulfilling that. I always wanted to be a real cop kind of thing, but they didn't. So we've got a badge though, and they can carry a weapon and so forth and so on. So the fact that he had the badge, not a big deal. I think that it was revealing that he shows up at this scene with his son, and he didn't just have the badge in his wallet, he was displaying it. And that was, when I heard that, I thought, wow, this guy. So you're talking about a guy, and put it in context, his family, his father, his grandfather, they were the solicitors. He didn't carry on that role. They'd been in that county for over a century. I mean, so all of that adds up given who he was. And when he starts trying to answer those questions, and the prosecutor, I thought, was spot on, and he went after him. I'm a little concerned that the prosecutor, and I don't know what the strategy is here. You know, he is letting Murdaugh run his head, and he is letting Murdaugh get his narrative out there when he's asking him a lot of close-ended questions, or he's doing the old you would agree, and expecting a yes or no answer, but Murdaugh goes immediately into a narrative. There's only been a couple of times where the prosecutor has said, just answer yes or no. And I don't know if he's letting Murdaugh just giving him rope just so he can get them all tangled up and all the stuff that. But you got two lawyers, two capable lawyers sitting there doing lawyer things to each other. And it leaves the appearance sometimes that Murdaugh is the one who is cross-examining the prosecutor. So that to me is a little troublesome, and that may end up being troublesome to the jury, and that could produce a hung jury. I think we're going to either get a guilty verdict or a hung jury. I don't think there's going to be an acquittal on this thing. But
and you raised yeah, I was going to say you raised a really interesting point, because we spoke last night's show. We had defense attorneys on. They said that the witness is leading the state, whereas Creighton Waters needs to lead the witness. I think he tried to start to take charge today, but Patricia Burns writes he's an expert at word salad. That is certainly true. Nikki T here writes, Paul's video, there are two videos, one that shows him in a different change of clothes, and then the one where we hear his voice. So she writes, Paul's video, different clothing, trying to interfere with witnesses regarding the time and clothes, the phone data, the car data, all point to guilt. Scott, it's kind of hard to evade actual evidence. I mean, he can talk all he wants and get into this word salad, but actual facts matter, right?
Yes, they do. It's easy to explain the evidence that's presented. It's kind of a common sense walkthrough. The evidence can often speak for itself, but you need a witness to articulate it. For example, a recorded statement. If somebody gives me a confession, it's recorded. It is displayed to the court, to the jury. However, you still need the interviewer to kind of walk the jury through that, even though it was just said. And it's a common sense. It's simply stating this is what you heard, and that's you believe your eyes and your ears. When you're trying to explain away something that is so common sense, it doesn't sound right. It defies common sense, and I think that's what we're kind of witnessing, this desperate act to explain away pieces of evidence that speak for themselves, and somebody with a little bit of reason should be able to say, I believe what I've just heard.
Yeah, I mean, the big question is, if he didn't do it, who did it? Because there really wasn't a lot of time for anyone else to do it. Jennifer Lloyd writes, I think the investigative part in this whole thing was botched, and now it will probably be a hung jury because, again, they didn't go in and process the crime scene in the home. There were a lot of issues letting people walk over the crime scene, et cetera, et cetera. Financial crimes and liars don't equal murder, and prosecution hasn't shown any proof of murder. Followed by Louise Henry. We had Dr. Laura Petler on the other night. She's a forensic expert that reconstructs crime scenes. And Louise writes, I still think the doctor of criminal pathology is the most correct comments. She talked about how it's a staged crime of passion because of the boat accident and his drug enterprise. She says that that it all resonates in her mind as a staged murder. Followed here by White Raven. It sounded to me like he was apologizing for the actual murders instead of lying. I was blown away in that moment. I'm not sure exactly what that moment is, but Phil, to you, there's this phrase that I had never really heard of, but it's being bandied about now, called a family annihilator. And so someone tweeted out, if someone was there waiting to annihilate this family, why did they spare Alex Murdaugh? Why did the little arm people, they're saying that because the defense experts say that the killer had to be somewhere between 5'2" and 5'4" because of the angles. And I joked that it might have been Tattoo from Fantasy Island. But this guy goes on to say, why did the little arm people only kill Maggie and Paul? No guns seen at the kennels for Alex. So how and when did the little people get into the gun room? Alex just said no blackout and hog rotation that day. You raise a good point, though. People have said, oh, it's a family annihilator, someone who came to kill the family, maybe a cartel member, but that would make no sense because Alec is still here and he was there when it happened. Or is this person and myself totally wrong?
Don't know where that term comes from. Never heard it before. I would imagine it's come from someone's imagination, or it's come off of some television show somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, to respond to that, I don't give that particular any credence. But what I will say is that there's a much bigger story here than just I stole a bunch of stuff, I was doing a bunch of drugs, and I would never do anything to intentionally hurt Mags and Paw Paw. So he's doing all these things on the stand. He's trying to present himself as this sympathetic figure. He's using these supposed family nicknames and referring to them in that way all the time. And then when he gets to the point where he's talking about Paw Paw or he's talking about Mags, then he's emoting and that kind of thing. Now, I have read that the wife, Mags, as he called her, had seen a divorce attorney or someone to that effect a couple of weeks prior to this. If that's true, I think, and his son, Paul, was the one involved in the boating accident, which killed the young lady. And now you have Paul's an ex-girlfriend coming out and saying that he strangled her one night. So you've got a bunch of, and then you've got these other bodies that are associated with him. You've got the housekeeper that fell down the stairs and died. You've got the homosexual friend of Buster's who's in the mix, who ended up dead. They still haven't closed that homicide. It was not a hit and run accident on some dark road someplace. I've just got to believe that this guy was about to have all of his dirty laundry exposed. And that was going to be done, if this is true about the wife going to a divorce attorney, that's where it was going to happen. And if that's the case, then we were going to see even a much worse version of this depraved individual than we're now seeing on the stand today. So there is so much, the depth of this story right now, to me, it looks like a bottomless pit. In regards to the investigation being botched, I would disagree with that. Look, SLED, I've worked with those guys. They're on top of their game. This thing was put together, and they're involved in the overall investigation that compart all of these parts. And I think Murdaugh is concerned about that, and that's why he gets on that stand and he starts doing his deal. When we're talking about his mannerisms on the stand, just real quickly, I want to go back to that for a second. There were a couple of times where he would say something, or right before he would say something. I got to go back and look and see what that moment was, but he would do this. You would see this rapid shoulder shrug thing, and then he would say something, or he would have just said something, and you'd see this, and then you'd get the tooth sucking. So he's doing a lot of things there that, to me, throughout that part of it, appears to be deceptive. Now, to discuss his, his possible psychotic episode and that kind of thing, I don't think so. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a forensic psychologist, but
you tend to
I know
think
people.
You tend to think it was planned?
I'm sorry?
You tend to think it was planned, that he was planning?
I think so. I think so. Nobody in a moment of passion would go kill the wife with a rifle and then, well, you know what? That didn't quite do it. So let me go get the shotgun and blow my son's head off. that doesn't strike me as somebody who acted in a moment of passion. That strikes me as a person who was setting a scene, who had a mission, knew why he was doing it, and wanted to stage a scene to make it look like possibly two people, or what is this term we're now
family annihilator.
Family annihilators were involved in some way.
Not to laugh at that, but it's just these phrases come up and everyone starts to use.
Well, I'm sure I'll fade heat for making fun of that, but
I guarantee you'll see that phrase within an hour of getting off.
Well, that's like persons of interest.
Yes.
I hate that freaking phrase. Got started by some, I think, an LAPD sheriff's detective in 1986 or some oddball thing. Look, if I'm interested in you, you're a freaking suspect.
Love it. Coop 3000, who I think is an attorney. I say this every time, and you can let us know, Coop. He's answering like a lawyer, not saying I believe him, but not surprised by the particularity with which a lawyer answers precise questions. Scott, Eric Bland represented the housekeeper who also fell down the stairs and died. Another death that's mysteriously linked to this family. So Eric Bland, I've had him on the show, and Alex Murdaugh basically said he lied about being at the kennels this whole time because he was paranoid from the drugs he was on. So Eric Bland tweeted the following out. I'd like to get your reaction. And he's putting this, he's suggesting this is what the prosecution should have asked today. Mr. Murdaugh, if paranoia made you lie to law enforcement on being at the kennels on June 7th, then why did paranoia not make you report the social media threats of Paul? Why were you not paranoid enough to worry about security to Buster and you after the murder? So what about this notion of, kind of selectively choosing things? So he was too paranoid to tell the truth about the fact that he was at the kennels, but he wasn't paranoid enough to warn his only surviving son that there could be imminent danger.
Yeah, so go back to the lie, right? And he admitted on the stand, once I lied, I continued to lie. And so, yeah, you can ask that about every previous action, not only with the charges of murder that he's currently in trial for, but every suspicious death that seems to have occurred around him. It seems like life is swirling around, obviously for decades, holding this very big secret. I don't think it's a secret from the family. I don't think it's drug addiction, if it's really that big, was held secret from his wife and his kids and his partners. They all knew, absolutely. If they chose not to know, then it was selective. But his world is now unraveling, and now he's seeing dollar signs paying out for a lawsuit, a civil suit, right, for the boating accident. And if his addiction is spiraling as opposed to getting under control, it doesn't seem like it was getting under control because he wasn't seeking help. Then ultimately, what is he thinking as? He's thinking as a desperate drug addict, and my funding sources are depleting, thereby my addiction, I'm going to have to find money elsewhere. So his whole life is just coming apart, and he's lied, and ultimately the jury's going to look and saying, well, if you lied and you continue to lie and you've now told us you're a liar. I mean, we are taught as witnesses, if your credibility is shot, everything that came out of your mouth is, I no longer am paying attention. And so that would follow through with, I'm all this, but not a murderer. But that's okay. I've already stopped believing you once you said you were a liar. I think ultimately, I totally agree. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass that straight face test. And
Scott, by the way, I just found the statistic, which is right in your wheelhouse. I'd like to get your take on this. Alex Murdaugh on the stand says that he took 60 30 milligram oxy pills in a day, 60 30 milligram pills in a day.
Wow.
And that opiates gave him Murdaugh energy. And the person who tweeted it said that's a hell of a lot of pills and tolerance that no one suspected his addiction. What's going on here? I mean, there's some people who don't even think he had a real addiction, that he was just maybe dealing these drugs. But 60 30 milligram pills in a day, can you give our viewers, STS Nation, a sense of how much that is?
Well, I worked narcotics for years.
Well, Phil, go ahead, Phil.
I can tell you.
Phil, what would you be like on 60 30 milligram pills of oxy?
I'd probably be a real happy guy, or I'd be comatose, one or the other, or both. That's an incredible amount. And what do they call OxyContin? I think it's referred to as hillbilly heroin, right? That's a pretty, but there are people that can function and have that and be doped up, up to their ears. So I'm not surprised at the fact that he was able to function. And if he was taking that amount, I'm surprised that something didn't come through. So I go with Scott. I don't think this was a secret. I think this was a secret in plain sight. I think everybody knew about this. It's probably the worst kept secret in South Carolina. And again, this kind of stuff, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. People kill for sex, drugs, or money. So you got drugs and money involved in this deal. If you start talking about not only the theft, but if you start talking about what may have been possible divorce proceedings, I just think there was going to be a lot revealed, and it was just something he could not handle. Now, if he's talking about this amount of money with the dope, this amount of usage, guys that I dealt with that were like that in narcotics were selling that stuff. Now, they might be using some of it, but they're making some coin off of it. And given his predilection for stealing from the law firm, from his clients, it sounds to me like he got in that vicious cycle of, I need more money to do this, and I can't do this unless I get more money. And now when I'm doing this over here, I can use this to get more money because I'm stealing stuff over here. But now if I start selling some of this stuff, and remember, he was buddies with local law enforcement, like buddies, like the sheriff that's no longer the sheriff that got removed. So there's no telling what kind of incestuous relationship that he had. And maybe, look at it. Maybe OxyContin in South Carolina is at a premium and it's a higher price. There's a whole lot of reasons.
I think you dropped off when Scott and I were talking. It was $50,000 a week. And when you watch this documentary, you'll see that they have a airstrip on their property, a Moselle, and the plane just goes right into a private hangar. So there's a lot of talk about a larger drug issue going on here. But Scott, back to you. Did you have people that you, caught who were doing 60, 30 milligram pills in a day? Is that a stunning number to you?
No, I've never heard of that amount. I was just trying to do some quick math, right? So $50,000. So I'm just going to take it. But I know the drug markets are different at different parts of the country. They're not that different. And so let's just say 30 milligrams, at least from what I've dealt with on the street, is the lower form. Usually I was dealing in the 80s, right? 80 milligram. These are high potent. So 30, you're talking about a lower, typically $5-10 a pill. And of course, when I was doing, these are the days when you're actually getting them from pharmacies prescribed by off-the-wall doctors, as opposed to now everything is through the mail, etc. There's lots of deals out there, but let's just say at $10 a pill, and he's saying he's using the equivalent of probably 2 bottles, right? They typically one a day, and typically you get a 30-day supply, and so you're 30, but you're talking 2 bottles a day. If we were to use it at $10, that's $600 a day. 18,000. I was just doing some math. 18,000 a month. That's extraordinary. So if he's spending 50,000,
and that's a week, not a month. 50,000 a week.
50,000 a week.
A week.
I just, it's so mind-boggling that he's.
I think we're going to find out.
He's here today.
This may be his narcissism coming through, that he wants people to think.
Yes,
I was using 50. I mean, this guy is a freaking liar, folks. I mean, come on. I when he said that, I was just like, how in the world are you even still here?
Yeah.
So,
It's a little tough to believe. This one's interesting to me. Lynn M writes, listening to Alex Murdaugh makes me feel tense and ill. Something is terribly off with him, and I don't believe a word he says, except when he admits to financial crimes, of course. And by the way, I just have to bring this up because I love it. Hello from Shaquille Oatmeal, my favorite new name. Phil, to you, you're you've done it a gazillion times, and you've been in these tight rooms with some of the worst people on earth who have been rehabilitated, as you like to say, permanently. But listening to people like this can make people feel very uncomfortable. Why? Is it just because most normal people are not used to it? And because I find the same thing. He makes me, all these movements, the lip smacking, the tears, just, I don't know. There's something about him that makes me a little uncomfortable. But what is it about people who are connivers that do that to others?
Well, they have that effect on other people because they are amoral. There may be look, there's only two elements in the world. There's good and there's evil. That's it. And what you're seeing here on display is evil. And it should make people feel uncomfortable. Now, for me, it's interesting to me because that's what I did. I mean, I looked at these types of people for an entire career. But for the citizen out there, for lack of a better term, who is watching this stuff unfold, and if you can imagine what it makes you feel like watching it on a television screen, think about how those jurors are feeling sitting in the same room with this guy. And I was told that when he was doing his snot campaign there were a couple of jurors that were crying. So now the question is, why are they crying? Are they crying because they have now been face to face with the enormity of what this person did to his wife and his son? Is that why they're crying? Or has he achieved presenting himself as this very sympathetic character that, oh, woe is me. It wasn't me that did this. It was somebody that looked like me, that kind of thing. So and I would say, I'm really, if that is the way that makes her feel, I would say quit watching it. Good grief. Don't put yourself through it. But that's let the trained professionals handle that.
White Raven writes, Maggie's sister testified, and this is true, when she asked Alec who could have murdered them, he replied, I don't know, but they planned it for a long time. Scott, is that kind of a...
That's an admission.
Yeah, it's an admission. Scott, I was going to ask you, is that a slip-up? But Phil says it's more than a slip-up.
Yeah, they being he planned it for a long... Absolutely. It's one of those, it's just like all these other things, even though the son came out and testified that it wasn't, I did him real bad, it's they did him real bad. Again, you get some of these witnesses that are saying, defy common sense, defy what you're hearing as believable. And so it's him saying that, they planned it for a long time. Why say that? How does that have anything to do with anything? Other than if somebody's legitimately coming to stalk you, to threaten you, and so forth, and there's all this buildup. What does that have to do with anything? They've been planning this for a long time. It's just other than, yes, his own words about what's inside his head. Yeah, absolutely a slip up.
Well, if we're sitting in the room and he makes a statement like that, that's an admission. That is going to be something I'm going to go, whoa, put that back here, and we may come back to that later. But
so you wouldn't follow that up right away, Phil. You'd store it in that noggin of yours and then use it.
I might say, of course, it would depend on the flow of the conversation at that point in time. But if he says that, my question to him would be, why? And who is they? Those would be my two questions. Why? Why those people? Why would those people be planning this? And then who are those people? And see what that answer is then, and watch him try to manipulate the conversation from them. But to me, that's an admission.
Now I want to know how Phil came up with those two questions so fast. Is that just because you were a homicide detective and I wasn't? What's going on there? You came up with those.
You asking me that question?
Yeah.
I'll let the viewers decide.
Sarah Perez writes, I've learned so much about the criminal justice system and psychology from this channel. I appreciate you three gentlemen and every other phenomenal guest you bring, Joel. Thank you so much. It has nothing to do with me. I love listening to these guys, which is why the show is having success. Thank God. By the way, hit that like button right now and subscribe if you haven't already. Laura Allison Slacum writes, Alex Murdaugh is guilty definitively here. Scott, to you, and then we'll spend maybe the last 50. Phil, do you have 15 more minutes?
I've got probably another half hour.
Okay. I want to give STS Nation what they want, which is a little on the evildoer, because I saw a couple of questions on him. But Mandy Matney, she's well known. She created the Murdaugh Murders podcast, which is very successful. She tweeted out, Alex Murdaugh, and she's paraphrasing him. Mark Tinsley lied. He was one of the lawyers. Morgan Doughty lied. I don't know who that is. Jeannie Seckinger lied. Blanca Simpson lied. Shelley Smith lied. I lied too a lot, but you should believe me this time. The point she's making is that everyone around him lied. He admits he lied, but now I'm going to tell you something about these murders. How difficult is it to reconcile that, Scott? With this caveat, there are reports that a couple of the jurors were crying yesterday when he was on the stand. That doesn't bode very well for the state, does it?
No. So it's emotion, right? And so
I just addressed that. So yeah,
absolutely. It's the there is a lot of planning and thought and discussions in the defense side of this, trying to figure out, hey, do we put you on the stand? Because across the board, never put the person who is at the defense table on the stand, even when there would be some thoughts that they could explain away or hope to explain away. Never put them on the stand, because that's the worst case scenario. Let the prosecution either pursue or lose the case based upon whatever, right? So you're talking about somebody that is a human being, and they're trying to sway a jury by saying, hey, if I killed, would I miss them? And so they're just trying to appeal to certain sensibilities and emotions that a person may think, because everybody sitting in that juror has I would eventually pretty easy guess, has not committed a murder, and so thereby they don't know what it's like to think about committing a murder. And so they're just trying to think, hey, if this man committed that murder of loved ones, he wouldn't be crying, he shouldn't be crying, and thereby if he's crying and sobbing, I got to believe that he's absolutely innocent. There's those thoughts. But when they go back to the deliberation room and say, but the words that he said he's a liar, and all these things come out to play, the totality of the evidence that's displayed, what ultimately will lead a reasonable person to believe. And so, yeah, people can, just as good as a liar you can be, you can also display true emotions, and whether those emotions are true sadness for the loss of life or true sadness for that the loss of your freedom for the rest of your life, can cause some amazing emotions. So it ultimately the jury will have to decide, are those emotions, yeah, maybe you do have some remorse, but at the moment, did you do it? And did the prosecution present um, a good amount of evidence? Right. That's what it comes down to.
And we're going to see how it all plays out. J. Thomas Reset. I wish I could watch Alex's feet. Feet are indicators for sure. I want Phil to address that. But first, Harris County from Allie Snow. Hometown hero, Phil. No truer words ever spoken. Shout out to Kat. Hello from rainy Northern California. At least it's not snowing. I heard it's snowing in LA, which is insane. Where's the shirt? Some of the clothing used is mysteriously missing. Nowhere to be found. But Phil, back to feet. Are you looking at feet in the interview room?
You bet.
And what do feet do when things aren't going well?
Well, again, we've talked about this in the past, but there are certain things that the body will do that cannot be controlled. Women in particular will take their shoes on and off. When I excuse me, when I set someone up in an interview room, it's open. No tables between us, no barriers, nothing. It is them and me, and we've got that spacing in there. And I have the ability to move around in the room, and they don't. So I am watching that entire visual of their body and what their body is doing, while at the same time listening to what they're saying and how they're saying it. So it is a multifaceted operation to be the interviewer in the room talking to a murder suspect. And all of those components, again, and I'll emphasize this, not one in and of itself shows deception, but when you start getting a combination of those things, to again use Murdaugh, the tooth sucking, the lip licking, the shoulder shrugging, the leaning forward into surrender type stuff. And I'm like Jay here. I'd love to see his feet. I'd love to see what's going on below the waist there, because he may be shuffling those feet and we just can't see them. He may be, doing the knees back and forth. So there would be a lot to be able to tell, to kind of tie it into what's going on up on top. So yeah, that's a great point about the feet. That's certainly something that it's all a component of the overall picture of the interview.
Guys should be lucky Phil is not watching every single one of you right now. You'd all be nervous. Elizabeth Kagan, hey, love your show. We love you too. Best show on, better than Fox and Law and Crime. Thank you, Barbara Cohn. Appreciate that. And then this one here, Baby Doll. Shout out to Baby Doll. Before he took the stand, hung jury. After this crazy circus that is Alex Murdaugh on the stand, don't drop the soap. So we will see what happens there. So I saw a couple of comments on this sidebar here, transitioning over to the evildoer for the last bunch of moments for today's episode. There are photos now emerging of the home at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, and it is completely boarded up. All the windows are now boarded up with plywood, almost looking like a hurricane home here in Florida, with fencing around it. Scott Duffey, what do you make of that? STS Nation would like to know what is going on and why that is happening. Any idea?
So you have a house that is now become home of one of the most notorious crime scenes that we have seen recently. I mean, just 4 lives brutally destroyed. So I've seen situations where you level a place, you put up a memorial, you start new. I just can't imagine anybody wanting to be in there. And so if you don't board it up and you just, a crime scene cleanup crew goes in, it's one thing to clean up the evidence of blood splatter and whatnot. But now imagine just the whole spirit of the building. Who would want to go back? What parent would want to allow their children to take residence there? It's to me the only thing that makes sense. Whoever the owners of the building are is to remove it, to get rid of it. And so maybe it is getting ready for demolition. That would be my best guess.
Phil, any thoughts? You agree with Scott?
Well, I agree with Scott. I can't imagine anyone having any interest in ever living in that home again. I mean, it's real life. It's Amityville horror stuff in real life times 10. And I just can't imagine. I think it would reflect well on the owners to do what Scott just suggested.
And it probably will and should happen. Did our man Phil freeze up on us? Oh, there he is. He's back. Phil.
And can I clarify something?
Sure.
Since we're talking about the evildoer. So there have been a few folks that, get their panties in a wad because I refer to the evildoer as the evildoer. And then I will talk about the presumption of innocence. So let me make the distinction here. They are mutually exclusive terms. I call him the evildoer because the evidence that I have seen, when I assess that particular case, it leads me to believe that he is the one who did this. Okay? So that's my assessment of that scene. When I talk about his presumption of innocence, that's a constitutional right guaranteed by the Constitution. That is a legal circumstance and condition. One has nothing to do with the other. I'm giving an assessment based on my experience and where that evidence has led me to be. Over here, that is what we are afforded, each one of us, under the Constitution. So I wanted to clarify that. I'm sure that the people that are panties in a wad about that will probably not like that explanation, but that is the truth.
They'll have to live with it, but that's what makes America great. They cannot agree with you also, Phil. So moving on here to, so we have a friend of the show, Kevin Fixler, and you should check him out. He is the investigative reporter for the Idaho Statesman, and he traveled to the Poconos in Pennsylvania, not far from the great state of New Jersey and not far from the great state of Delaware, where Scott and I are from. He had some interesting things that he kind of uncovered there. So he met a guy named Thomas Arntz, who's a high school friend. They're both 27 now. And he says this about Brian Kohberger. Scott, to you. He says he always wanted to be dominant physically and intellectually, said Arntz, who was a year behind Kohberger in school. He had to show that he was smarter and bigger than you and try to put me down, meaning this guy Arntz, and make me feel insecure about myself. So much of that was a torment, and I didn't want to be around him anymore. Does that description in any way fit with what you'd expect from what this guy has done? I know they're two completely different things going from this to killing 4 people, but in the escalation of the character and the personality, does it fit?
Yeah, and like I've said before, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that have one, whatever you want to call it, social awkwardness or a hang up or whatever it is, whatever skill, coping mechanism that's lacking, and yet will be extremely productive and fruitful and happy, right? And they'll learn to live with whatever issues they have. However, here you have a crime So now you're working your way backwards, and now you've identified somebody, and you're picking apart every imaginable aspect of their life growing up, and so ultimately, what reporters are doing, going back and speaking to people from his childhood, to law enforcement, as I remember reading his article, that some people had already spoken to the FBI. So the FBI is already doing their work and helping with the investigation to put together every imaginable piece of the puzzle here. And so is there a pattern that they're trying to develop, and so forth? They've already put stalking as a possibility. And so you have somebody that it seems like from quite a few years, not just recent past, has this tremendous issue with coping mechanisms and social and developing friends and whatnot. Not somebody who's just quiet and so forth, but somebody who has major issues with relationships, and you have now evidence through witness accounts of somebody here who tries to put somebody down, whether emotionally, I think even one time physically, where horseplay, but no, it came down to a physically putting somebody down. So absolutely, they're building a personality trait here to coincide with some of the evidence, that a lot of the evidence that hasn't been disclosed. And so as they put together physical profiles and so forth, they're putting together psychological profiles, and they may fit, they may not fit, they may get included into a trial if it goes to a trial. But at the end of the day, they're just trying to firm up everything that law enforcement has thought about this individual. They were not just 4 murders, they were 4 brutal murders. And so everything we're hearing seems to fit a pattern of an individual that's had tremendous issues, and they were spiraling, sort of like Murdaugh, spiraling, whether it be self-medicating through one narcotic or another, to how you dealt with people close to you in school and family. And ultimately, at the end, it seems to just be another piece to the puzzle of his troubling life.
And Phil Waters can breathe a sigh of relief because Kathleen Jameson writes, "Good explanation, Phil. My panties are not in a wad, by the way, LOL." And I'm guessing Kathleen is from, I don't know, England, maybe.
I appreciate that, Kathleen. I'm always trying to help. And if I can unwad any's panties, I will do it.
Now, Phil, People Magazine, again, they've actually broken quite a bit of news on this. So take that however you'd like to take it. But they have a source close to the investigation that says that the evildoer his phone had multiple pictures of one of the victims. Is that the proverb? If that is true, to me, that is even stronger than the DNA on the knife sheath. But what do I know? What do you think?
Well, my response is similar to the one when you asked me the question, I think last week, about a source. I would say that if it's true, it will be one other component of the overall stack of evidence and affirmative links. I don't think in that case there is one. I don't know that I would put them in a pecking order. Obviously, the DNA stuff is very important. This just goes to another link to him, and it will start to reveal the relationship. That's the big question here, right? What relationship did he have with one or more of these young people? And it doesn't name. I don't think I read that. I read that particular article. It
doesn't say who it was. It just says
it doesn't name anyone. It just says it. But again, I wish people would quit doing that, because it's again, I think be patient. Let's wait, see if it goes to trial, and see what comes out in that trial.
And so back to Kevin Fixler and Scott, I'm interested. You've got a very unique take on all of this. Kevin Fixler spoke to a bunch of high school friends of Brian Koberger, and they spoke of his interest in law enforcement. His sophomore yearbook picture features him dressed in a uniform and in the middle of a push-up during his law enforcement class at the county's half-day technical school. He hoped to become an Army Ranger, the caption read, but his interest was primarily law enforcement. Does this sound like a guy who, wanted to, had these, I don't want to say visions of grandeur, but, he had this image of himself as this archetypal law enforcement guy, and just somewhere along the lines goes off the rails and then takes things into his own hands? Is that how you see it, or am I off the track here?
No, teaching law enforcement recruits in my hometown or whatnot, in the police academy or whatnot. I often tell my recruits, hey, you came from the community. Often, I think young recruits find themselves dealing with temptations, and so they make a decision in their life. Hey, maybe I had some bad experiences, and I could have been on the other side of the law. And many of the interviews of suspects that I've had, where I've had that suspect say, if I made a different choice early in my life, I would be sitting where you're sitting. And right, so law enforcement ultimately is there to do good and help the community. And but at the same time, people make tremendous errors in their life. So maybe they're pursuing it with good intentions, but haven't battled those demons back enough to where now they've made irreversible, fatal errors. So and look at the Golden State Killer. You for a very short period of time became a police officer and had stolen some of the early, like the hammer and whatnot, some things that he had used in his crime, he had stolen while on duty. So this correlation between law enforcement and people now who have done dastardly or just horrific things, it really, I've kind of seen it so much where I realize that people just at some point in their life make a bad turn. So
that made me think of BTK. We interviewed his daughter, Carrie, who's a really, really sweet person, still struggling. He was in like animal control, but walked around in uniform, but he was also president of his church, seemingly an upstanding citizen, obviously the furthest thing possible from that. Shout out to Overt Covert. I live in Idaho, and I don't know what you are, but probably a great person. Phil, to you, and we'll round it out after this and get some closing thoughts. Back to Kevin Fixler's article, which I did think was interesting. Most people who were interviewed in this article back from his home area say that during his high school years, they noticed considerable weight loss. It happened between his junior and senior year. He was kickboxing every day when he started to lose this weight and running in the evenings. He also became hyper-focused on what he ate to the point that he developed an eating disorder. He had weighed more than 300 pounds, and he had lost as much as half of his body weight, so much that he had to get a tummy tuck because of all the loose skin. And then from that point on, it says, it seemed to me he had a desire to be the quote-unquote alpha. Did this physical transformation translate into a mental transformation of some kind?
Well, I think so, because what is all that based on? Like all of this, it's all ego stuff, and he finds himself, from what I've read, he's unacceptable to the normal folks around him, the kids that are getting the attention, the popular kids, and so forth and so on, and they're not treating him right, or bullying him, or whatever his particular circumstance may be. So he's one of these people that figures, well, I will make them accept me because I'm going to go through this incredible transformation and going to show them that I am not what you've been calling me all these years. And so that makes sense. All the stuff he went through, I've seen the picture where he's in that law enforcement post in high school, and you know, he's a fat boy. I mean, he's a big boy, and that must be in his 300-pound stage. But he's trying, and of course, you don't know what kind of reinforcement that he's getting or he's not getting. Those folks may be making fun of him because he's trying to better himself and he's trying to get involved in this type of thing. And he's being taught. Look, I've run across people, I'm sure Scott has too, throughout my career, 33 years as a cop. You run into the security guard working in the apartment complex and wants to get in that conversation with you about, I'd like to put in an application to HPD. What do you think? That kind of thing. Or you got the guys that have already done it and they're just never going to get accepted into the law enforcement because they don't have the qualifications to begin that initial journey. So, and sometimes people will respond in a way that becomes completely negative because they're going to go after those people that in their minds were the ones holding them back. So this transition for the evildoer, I see that as kind of a natural progression of things. Now, knowing what he ultimately ended up being charged with doing. So I don't find any of it. I think it's good reporting. It's certainly good background. And I am sure that the prosecutors have all of that background and they're going to use it in the prosecution of this case if it comes to trial. So I think your reporter friend is spot on about pointing out those consistencies in his growing up and his emerging into an adult. I don't think there's that's a pretty clear picture about why he is where he is today.
And I'm going to see if we can get Kevin Fixler on the show, maybe with Great Scott and Phil Waters as soon as next week to talk about some of this reporting. He is the voice of reason. I love the high and tight haircut, looking sharp, looking like a badass former FBI agent, which he was, Scott Duffey, for 20 years in Delaware and for 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. By the way, Phil, from Gen Max Denver, family annihilator is someone who kills their family, no longer serve them, angry, control issues, narcissistic danger, Murdaugh. He did it, in case you were wondering about the definition. But Scott, to you, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Does this end, and I'm talking Alex Murdaugh again, in a acquittal, hung jury, or conviction? How do you see it playing out?
Ooh, so an earlier slide you had about the stats about majority with the conviction and so forth. It only takes one, and that's a hard gamble. Okay, you put me on the spot.
Sounds like Joe Biden now. Sounds like a politician from Delaware.
Come on, man. Come on, man.
I'm gonna say hung. I don't know why, but
hey, it's good an answer as any. The man in the Hawaiian shirt who drives a Ferrari, by the way, and is the real Magnum PI, is actually America's most respected detective. Phil Waters spent 23 years as a homicide detective in the Houston Police Department, also a Marine, and the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations. And he starred in the show The Interrogator, which should have been called, according to Phil, The Interviewer. Phil, same thing to you. I'm putting you on the spot too. And by the way, White Raven says agree, hung jury. What do you say, Phil?
Well, I will tell you, because of my experience, you never know what a jury's going to do. So I have gotten out of the business of predicting. I will make, and I spoke to this earlier, but I think that it will be either a guilty or a hung jury. I don't think acquittal is in the mix. I know that the defense attorneys, one of the first things they did after the prosecution, in fact, the first thing they did after the prosecution rested, was to ask for a dismissal. And the reason was because what I read was that the case was mostly circumstantial. Really, I mean, that's your basis for a dismissal. And of course, it wasn't dismissed. I have seen cases that were circumstantial, that were stronger cases in prosecution than cases that had direct evidence. I think this is one of those cases. I think the circumstantial evidence is so powerful, and he has been unable to explain the circumstances. And he's been unable to explain why that circumstantial evidence is so strong. And I know he doesn't have to do that because the burden is on the state, but he's put himself on the stand. And so, like the prosecutor said today, there were some questions that the defense attorney was objecting to. The objections were overruled, and the word was, the perfect Perry Mason response was, he opened the door to this line of questioning. So I'm not going to predict. Well, my prediction will be, I'm going to take the middle of the road, which is what I very rarely ever do. It's going to be an acquittal. It's going to be a guilty, or it's going to be a hung jury, one way or the other.
By the way, Patty Martin, I got answers out of both of them. I love it. Patty Martin, going back to Kohberger for 1 second, I think this is interesting. She writes, nothing Kohberger did to lose weight and get in shape made him more attractive to women, and I'm sure that angered him. Maybe that is the case. He got in shape, did all this stuff, and didn't feed his ego. Venus Gal says there will be no acquittal. 12 people aren't that dumb, so agree. Is it 12? Think so. I believe it is. Ren writes, no acquittal, guilty or hung jury. They won't get 12, and on and on. We go. I was just looking at a comment there from Jay Thomas Reset about Phil's Hawaiian shirt, which says that is actually a Hawaiian flower-y shirt. I have some too. That is how I know. Yep, flower-y. I've never heard of that, Phil. Is he
okay?
Right?
Well, Jay, brother, this is the first time that I just have to disagree with you. This is an aloha shirt. This is not a flowery shirt. And it is actually made in Hawaii. So you have to have a manufactured Hawaiian aloha shirt with coconut buttons on it to make it official. I've never heard the term flowery before, but I'll put it in the memory bank in case I need to use it later.
We'll finish off here on Kathy G's guilty as sin. We will soon know once the jury begins to deliberate. Quick programming note. Tomorrow on Saturday, we are doing a live show at noon Eastern because there is so much interest in the Alex Murdaugh case. So join us live. We have a former CIA officer as well as a criminal defense attorney from the great state of Florida and a criminal defense attorney from South Carolina who knows the case inside out. And then Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time, Dr. Ann Burgess is 86 years old. They created the show Mindhunter on Netflix, loosely based on her life. She's one of the best in the world at criminal profiling, and she's going to be joined by Dr. Gary Bricado and Jeff Wood, who's a former FBI agent out of Boston, and they are talking about mass murder, specifically gang mass murders, why it happens, and why it should maybe concern you because it's going on around us, and gangs are up to some pretty sinister stuff, as Scott Duffey and Phil Waters know all too well. But until then, Love you, America. Love you,
Aloha.
Hawaii. Love you, Delaware.